it this way. He said, our truest life is when we are in our dreams awake. Emerson, one of the people that we revere, who lived right here in Concord, said that the ancestor to every action is a thought. The energy that you have for creating what you want is in your thoughts.
Dr. Wayne Dyer is a best-selling author, lecturer, and modern philosopher. He holds a doctorate in counseling psychology and is America's leading teacher of transformational wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a spiritual solution to every problem. It makes a very large claim, the title of this program. Where we are right now is perhaps the most fitting place we could be to talk about this subject. We're in Concord, Massachusetts, at the First Parish. If you look right up here to my right, there's a balcony, and Ralph Waldo Emerson and his family would come and sit there when they were children on Sundays. His grandfather, William Emerson, was the minister here when the shot that was heard around the world was fired, that started the American Revolution, followed by the French Revolution and all of the changes that took place in the history of humanity. Much of it started right here at this First Parish, on this site where we are now seated. And this program is really about transcendent ideas. The idea that within each and every one of us, there is something much more that most of us haven't even begun to tap, that allows us to create for ourselves a solution to things that we have called problems in our lives. Transcendentalism was born here. And transcendentalism isn't an ism that you join. You don't pay any dues. You have to remember that back in the 1830s and 40s and 50s, there were things going on in this country and in this world that today we find intolerable. Slavery was an accepted practice at that time. But right here in Massachusetts, in Concord, people like Emerson and Bronson Alcott, who was the father of Louisa May Alcott, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Henry David Thoreau, people who would come to the school of philosophy and talk about ideas about how to abolish such things as slavery. All of those ideas and more. The idea that somehow this notion that we are wicked, or that we are born in sin, or that there's something wrong with us as people, all of this was being discussed here in this place, in this beautiful place where new transcendent ideas took place. I was introduced to these kinds of ideas when I was a young boy. I was a sophomore in Detroit on the east side at Denby High School. And I had a biology teacher. And my biology teacher was a very well-meaning, a very nice man. When I was a young boy, I was a sophomore. And he asked me if I would, and as he did everybody else in the class, if we would like to pass biology, that we would like to turn in something called a leaf collection. Now, I had already passed leaves. I had identified all the leaves that there were to identify and gotten a good grade on them. But he said, no, you have to do something more. You have to collect a whole bunch of them and turn them in for an assignment and prove that you have seen them. And I told him, in probably not the most diplomatic of ways, I won't be doing that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. At that time, there were some tough things going on in my own family, and I was working, and my mom was going through a hard time, and there was a divorce situation taking place, and it just seemed like a waste of time to me. And I've always kind of been one of those people who, and I'm not saying that I encourage this, I'm just saying that I recognize it as a trait that I've lived with my entire life. That doing things that just didn't make sense were something that I always at least questioned. And more than questioned, I took the consequences. I think probably the most famous line out of William Shakespeare is a line that is most quoted because it is that which tells us an enormous truth. To be or not to be. That is the question. And it's a very powerful and important question to ask yourself. Am I going to be? Am I not going to be? But the lines that followed it were even more significant. Whether 'tis nobler in the minds of men to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and thus by opposing end them. And so you have to always ask yourself that question. I think I was doing that. I didn't quote Shakespeare in those days, but I knew that doing things that didn't seem right or didn't make sense or were just being done because everybody else did them didn't fit in. And when I told my biology teacher that I wouldn't be doing that, he sent me to the principal's office. And I sat in the principal's office on this bench that had been worn smooth by generations of people just like myself, waiting to see the principal. And I waited a Monday and then a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and finally on Thursday morning I was escorted into the principal's office. And he informed me that everybody had to do the leaf collection and I was no better than anybody else. And if I didn't do it, I would be taking biology over again in the summer. But in those 3 days that I waited for the principal to make his decision about what my consequences were going to be, they left books for us to read, hoping somehow that perhaps even if we didn't read it just by osmosis, just by sitting next to it, perhaps some of this wisdom would come to us. And one of the books that they left there for us to read was written by a man who came into this church and who lived right here in this town. His name was Henry David Thoreau. And it was called Walden Pond. And I read through Walden, and it was all about nature, and it was all about sort of having a great reverence for all that is natural. But at the back of that particular edition, there was an essay that he had written. And the essay was called On the Necessity of Civil Disobedience. And I'd like to recommend to any of you who are running schools, if you have children that you are trying to get to conform and to fit in and to be just like everybody else, don't have them read Thoreau. And don't tell them to read Emerson's essay on self-reliance, which also happened to be at the back of this particular edition. And in that particular essay, he was talking about the importance of taking a stand against things that you thought were foolish, and about not just fitting in and not just being what everybody else tells you should be. And by the time Thursday got in there and I went into the principal's office, I felt like I was an American philosopher. I felt like I was someone that should be in there being recognized and have books written about, rather than someone being told to write a leaf collection. And I had a girlfriend at that time. Her name was Mary Jo, and Mary Jo was one of those people that we called curve breaker. She didn't just do a leaf collection. She would have it indexed, and she would have it color-coded, and she would send to Australia for eucalyptus leaves. And she offered to even do it for me, and I said, no, it's a matter of principle. I said, it just doesn't make sense to make people do things just for the reason of fitting in and being just like everybody else. And that was my introduction to transcendentalism. And Thoreau became someone that I had great admiration for. And Emerson, who was considered to be America's teacher, I had incredible respect for. Thoreau had a wonderful definition of success in that essay. He said, if you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. And it's always been my very favorite definition of success. Advancing confidently, making the decisions that make sense to you, being independent of the good opinion of everyone else out there, trusting in here that this is why I'm here, and there's music playing inside of me, and I must let that music come out. And too many of us don't. When I say a spiritual solution to every problem, I'd like everybody in the audience to just do me a favor, if you will. I'd like you to just point to yourself. Everybody, just for 1 second, just point to yourself. And just look around and just notice how people are. And notice that nobody's doing this. Not one person in the room is doing this. Why is that? Because who we are is not here. Who we are is what? Here. And where have you all pointed to? You pointed to your heart. Shakespeare again put it this way. He said, "Go to thy bosom, knock there, and ask your heart what it doth know." What it doth know. Listening to your heart is what, to me, represents the approach to a spiritual solution to every problem. There's 3 words in that title, in the title of this program: spiritual, solution, and problem. I'd like to just take a brief look at each one of them and what they mean to me. I'd like to take the word problem first. You know, I've been studying something for several years, and the thing that I've been studying is called A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles is a very interesting collection of brilliant writing that I think if the world were living by it, perhaps we would have far, far fewer of the conflicts and struggles and so on that we have amongst ourselves and amongst nations and in our families and so on. And one of the lines that I came across in studying A Course in Miracles hit me very, very strongly. And this line, I couldn't get it out of my head. And here's what it said in there. It said, "You do not have any problems. You only think you do." You do not have any problems. You only think you do. Our problems are things that we carry around inside of us. And if we could recognize that these things that we call problems, no matter what they are, and I'm not here standing up here talking to you on television telling you that, the financial concerns that you face every day, the struggles that you face in your relationships, the whether or not you're going to be able to handle the health concerns and challenges that are facing you, all of these things that have come into our lives that we have labeled problems. But I'd like you to just remind yourself of where they are. They're not out there. They're in here. And they all represent something that I call energy. And one of my very favorite people in all the world, because he was not only a great scientist and a great thinker, but he was a great humanitarian as well. He would have really done well here in Concord. His name was Albert Einstein. And Einstein once said, "Nothing happens until something moves." Nothing happens until something moves. Everything is movement. Things look solid to us. You know, this watch on my arm looks solid. But if I were to take a microscope and turn up the magnification and look at this thing under a very, very strong microscope, you would see that it's really a dance. It's alive. It has molecules. Inside those molecules, there are all kinds of tiny little atoms. Inside those atoms are electrons and neutrons and protons and croutons and whatever it is, all of these things that we memorized when we were in physical science classes and so on. And then we have a new thing called quantum physics, and we look inside of these electrons and we find subatomic particles and subatomic particles. And what we've discovered through all of this is that everything is just energy. And you're watching a television set right now. And that television set has something coming into your home called energy. And you are looking at it, so there's visual energy, and you're hearing sound, you're hearing my voice right now, so there's something in the air between your receiver and my speaking here right now, something called sound waves, and they're all just energy. And if we were to understand how that energy comes into us, it comes into us through our senses, through our ears and through our eyes. And if we were to block off our ears and take all of the energy that was coming in the room into our ears, but before it hit our ears, we were to send it off to a scientist and say, "Give me a report, please, on this energy." They would send out the report and they'd come back and you'd look at it and you'd say, "Well, what's in there? What is this?" And they'd say, "Well, there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of energy. Some of it's very fast. Some of it's very low. Some of it's high. Some of it's low." I'd say, "But are there any problems in this report?" They'd say, "No, there's no problems in the energy. It just comes in high and it comes in low. It comes in fast and it comes in slow." And you know, That's one of the most important principles that you can learn and master in terms of identifying things that we call problems.